with the climate commitments that we have made at Glasgow, a lot of conversation has now started taking place around, moving from commitments to action on the ground. And for action on the ground, a lot of the thinking is also taking place around what kind of behavior changes can help achieve those ambitions. So behavior change is becoming a very important factor. And particularly, I see this as quite a landmark report in terms of how can we bring about behavior change through household energy reports. This has been done on a small scale, but it provides lessons for scaling up at a much bigger way. So we are very happy with this report, very proud of this report. And I think this is a direction that will scale up in many ways. Many different parts of the country will start looking at this kind of action. Now, a work of this nature couldn't have been possible for us without the support that we received from our partners. And I would particularly like to thank Tide. You've been wonderful partners. It's been great to work together with you. In particular, I would like to thank Sumati, Ravi, Santosh, Kiran. I mean, you were amazing partners for us. So it's really nice of you to have worked with us. Let's now continue working together on this to help scale up this whole effort. I, for one, am very proud of this work. Thank you very much. I'll leave that as my opening remarks for now. Back to you, Ahona.
Thank you so much, sir. And with this note, we will now be releasing the paper in the presence of all our esteemed guests. Thank you so much. We will now be beginning with our next session, but before that, we have our first poll of the day. It will show up on your screen and you have 30 seconds to answer. So, so this is the first poll, and here it is. $15 more seconds to go. So here are the results. The question is, how familiar are you with applied behavioral science? And it's interesting to know that 67% of all our attendees and participants have actually clicked on somewhat. So it is not that everybody really knows about it in detail, and people are quite keen to know about it. So I think this takes us to the next part of the event. And I request now the authors of the paper, Mindy Hernandez, who is the lead of the Living Lab WRI, and Sumita Malviya, Senior Manager, WRI India, to share the key insights from the report. Over to you both.
Great, thanks, Ahona. Can you see my screen? Great. Yes. All right. So as OP mentioned, that we are extremely proud of this effort that we have put together in understanding the impact of one of our initiatives that we have been implementing in partnership with Tide. The paper is called Shifting Household Energy Use in Bangalore Using Behaviourally Informed Home Energy Reports. And I will take you quickly through some of the aspects of the paper, the findings, the key findings. Mindy and I will be walking you through it. Just in terms of, briefly the agenda, we'll be talking about the challenges, about Vidyut Rakshaka, some of the science behind behavioral insights and studying the interventions in VR, the research methodology behind the paper, and also discuss the results and further policy implications and scale. When we look at the challenge of rising electricity consumption, I think this is, for most of you attending, this is not a very big surprise. India is predicted to experience one of the fastest growth rates in electricity consumption, even though our per capita consumption continues to be quite low, at least 30% lower than the global average. But at the same time, we have a different India in which we have rapid urbanization, improvement in living standards, which are leading to significant increase in residential electricity use, particularly in the middle and upper income households. And that is where the intervention like a home energy report becomes quite important, because home energy reports are essentially based on energy efficiency and energy conservation nudges. And they are, as we know, more cost effective than actually generating energy. But the reality is that within India, we have very limited research on HERs in emerging economies. And our paper is an attempt in sort of filling that gap to some extent. And hopefully, we, depending upon the feedback that we have at the end, we would like to understand if it has made an effort in that direction. I also wanted to quickly talk about the initiative with Vidyut Rakshaka, which I just mentioned in the beginning. Vidyut Rakshaka essentially is a household, is a consumer-focused energy saving and energy conservation program. This is the vision, theory of change, and the strategies that we've been using. So the vision is, of course, conserving energy through awareness and long-term behavior change. And our theory of change is that when we have to realize deeper and cost-effective energy efficiency savings, we need to combine technological interventions with behavior change programs. And we can do this through providing nudges and customized recommendations, creating awareness on efficient appliances and renewable energy. And through the whole process of the data that we have generated through VR, we are also looking at how the data can be used to inform residential energy consumption policy and its integration with demand-side management interventions. Briefly walking you through the approach that VR has. This is a very simplistic way of defining what we have been doing under VR. TIDE is our on-ground implementation partner. And while it looks just like a 4-stage process, it's essentially very data-driven, extremely analytical as well. So the first step is when VR participants sign up after an awareness drive is conducted by TIDE. There is data which is collected from the households through specific surveys and a very detailed questionnaire that we have. This data is then analyzed at the back end to generate what we call customized home energy reports or customized HERs. Following the rollout of this report, there are within the next 3 to 6 months, the households also get follow-up reports. So the customized energy reports carry the wealth of information needed to make that shift towards energy savings. And we would be delving a bit deeper into what these reports actually contain. And if we look at behavioral insights, I'd just like to quickly request my colleague Mindy to describe to us what we mean by behavioral insights and how we have used them in the paper. Mindy?
Thanks, Sumita. So before we go through, what these reports look like and their impact, I just want to talk a little bit about the behavioral insights on which these reports are based. The first is the idea of reference points. So when we think about our behavior, we don't analyze it by some objective measure of truth. We really use reference points to understand how our behavior is meeting a standard or not. And so the way that reference points are used in these household energy reports is by providing accessible energy use reference points. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those actually look like in practice. The next is social norms. So from the time we are young, we observe others' behavior and we moderate our behavior depending on how our peers behave. The problem with social norms is that sometimes the way other people behave is not observable, right? So if I want to know how much energy use I'm using, I don't know how much energy use my neighbor is using. And so what these home energy reports do, and the way that they're applied, is by making the unobservable observable to folks and giving them a social norm to use as a reference point. And the final idea is action tips. So we're more likely to change behavior when we think and we believe we have the tools to change, right? So I may want to change my energy usage. I may want to adopt a vegan lifestyle, but if I don't know how to do those things, I'm less likely to do it. And so by giving very simple, accessible, actionable tips, I'm more likely to follow through on the behavior. So the way that's applied to home energy reports is by providing really relevant and actionable tips. So we can go to the next slide. And you can see what these look like in practice. But first, sorry. But first, just to go through kind of the big research questions that we asked, we wanted to know what the effect was in kilowatt hours of VR reports on energy savings. So we did a pre-post analysis. What was average household energy? What did it look like before, 36 months before receiving reports? And then what did it look like 12 months after receiving reports? And for this, we relied on BESCOM administrative data with a sample of over 2,000 folks. We also wanted to understand not just what the impact was, but what are the mechanisms underlying that impact? What led to that impact? And so we really want to know what aspects of the report could be driving energy behaviors. So we did some survey analysis, some correlational analysis, and for that we relied on household surveys and some one-on-one interviews. And finally, we want to understand how can these reports be made even better in the future. And so we did some qualitative analysis with that survey data and interview data. We can go to the next slide. So this is what the report looked like. So if you were to get a report, if you think about that first part, when we talked about the behavioral insights and reference points, you really want to understand your neighborhood comparison and peer comparison. So this is how you were doing, this is how the community average looked like. There's also a historical comparison. So in this case, the reference point is not your neighbor, but your past self, right? So how are you doing compared to how you used to be doing? Are you improving or not? We can go to the next slide. And the next really builds on this idea of actionable tips. So I have learned that in India, your energy tax depends on taxation slabs. And so it can make a big difference if you can just bring your energy use down a little bit, you can go down to the full next taxation slab. And so one of the things the reports do is let people know that and give them a tip. You need to go down by 3 units in order to get to the next slab. And then some other actionable recommendations. This is an example with lighting, although the reports gave other tips. So for example, in lighting, it would really help if you shifted to LED bulbs. So things that really are actionable. We can go to the next slide. So I want to share with you the results, what we found. We can go to the next slide. And before I talk about what the results look like for our sample pre-post, I just want to draw your attention to the slide on the left, which is where we look at the VR sample energy usage from 2015 all the way to 2019 for our VR sample, as well as for the state of Karnataka, as well as for India in general. And what you can see is that for the state of Karnataka and for India in general, over this time period, 2005 to 2019, you see energy usage going up slightly over time. But when you look at the blue line, which is our sample, what you see is energy usage going down slowly over time. And so that's kind of an important counterpoint or contextual point. Then if we look at the slide on the right, we can see our samples energy usage before VR. So these are the 36 months before got VR reports with an average energy kilowatt hours usage of about 120 per average per month. And we see that decrease to 112 1 year post VR. So this represents a 7% decrease, which, as we say in the report, may seem small, but if you think about the scale and what this can do over time, like if this were scaled to the state or to Bangalore fully, it would result in a savings of $60 million a year and massive carbon savings equivalent almost to taking 100,000 cars off the road. So we want to put the 7% decrease into perspective. We can go to the next slide. We then wanted to look at consumption by different demographics. We looked at household size, zip code or PIN code, and we also looked at prior consumption. In general, there weren't many explanatory variables. The one that really stands out is prior consumption. And so what we find is that those who used less energy than average before going on VR, after VR, tended to use more energy than they did prior. Those who were above the norm, right, who were using more energy prior to VR, tended to, by quite a lot, 11.6 percentage points, bring their consumption down. And this mirrors other research from Power, Oracle, and others, that this is a trend that we see. We want to know more in future research about what's happening exactly. There's a hypothesis that when you give people information and a reference point about how others are behaving, those who were above the norm bring their behavior down, those who are below the norm bring their behavior up. That might be what's happening. It also might be just that it's a snapshot of a trend that was happening. Those who are using less energy before the reports were slowly bringing it up anyway, and we've captured that point of time. This is all really rich areas for future research. The one point I just want to make before going to the next slide is it's important to note that those folks who are using more energy are especially important to start to bring down. So it's nice to know that these HER reports, these household energy reports, are really affecting that high consumption group. We can go to the next slide. So the next section is really thinking about what aspects of this report made the most difference. And before I present those results, I want to get a sense from the folks on this call. We talked about actionable tips and social norms. So my question, this poll question, which will pop up in a second, is if you could get a household energy report, but it could only have one, a social comparison or actionable tips, which would you choose? What do you think would be the most helpful? So that poll will come up in a second. I think we have about 10 more seconds to vote. Right. I think we got everybody, so I think you guys can see this. The vast majority, 84% of you, want customized recommendations to save electricity. So I think that's fascinating, and it also is a really nice segue into our results. You can go ahead, Sumita. So what we find, and these charts will kind of underline it, but big picture is that the VR sample really appreciated and found the actionable tips the most helpful and the most motivating. So the way that we kind of explored this is first we wanted to understand how VR customers even perceive the clarity of each section. Did they understand goals for you, my consumption, and then the peer comparisons? And as you can see, 50% is this light line in the middle. For the goals for you section, the vast majority found that very clear or somewhat clear. And then it goes down in clarity. The recommendation section is also very clear, somewhat clear. But if you look at the bottom, historical comparison, and at the very bottom, neighborhood comparison, much fewer people found that very clear or clear at all, with a significant 20% proportion saying that it was just unclear. We can go to the next slide. We then wanted to understand how people found these different sections motivating. It's difficult to ask and for people to self-report on motivation. I would say I was very motivated to work out today, but that didn't happen. So motivation is always kind of a tricky thing to measure. But what we were looking at is how does their motivation compare or correlate with how clear a section is. And what we found is the clearer the section was, the more motivating people also found it. And so we can see that the recommendation section kind of reaches, and the goals section really reaches that point of being very motivating, and also a majority of folks finding that section clear. We can go to the next slide. So given that this was a successful intervention, and one of the things that, as OP was mentioning, we really have to think about how to move from commitments to action, might be a bridge from commitments to action. What's next? What do we do with these results? What are the policy and scale implications? And so I will let my friend Sumita take it over from here.
Thanks, Mindy. I would say that we have thought deeply about what the policy implications and of this kind of an intervention can be, and how this can be scaled up. What we do understand is that there are specific findings in the report for improving the HERs themselves. So we have categorized them into 5 buckets. First is testing and scaling. Given that we have different cultural and demographic contexts in India, testing out different messages and recruitment techniques will be needed to further improve the design of HERs. Our research was specifically focused in Bangalore, and the design of the HER was reflective of the Bangalore characteristics. But when we take it to other geographies, we may have to look at different formats and different ways in which we would like to invite participation of households in this. The second aspect to this, the improvement, is simplification. So no surprises there. When we have too much information, it's distracting for people who have very limited time. So we need to make sure that the reports have very clear information, and sections on energy use, the neighborhood comparison, and recommendations are directed directly at the user. The third aspect related to the simplification is that we need to come up with clear ways in which we are describing the recommendations or describing the comparisons. Maybe use mental models like emoticons or relevant icons, which people tend to understand and associate with very quickly. That could be one way to enhance the aesthetics of the HERs, but also to make them more relatable. The fourth way in which we would like to improve these reports is leveraging the recommendation section. As we have heard even in the polls that most are interested in getting these customized recommendations. So this section has to be made as actionable as possible, with very clear tips on how people can save energy. And this kind of information can be easily contained in a good electricity bill by a DISCOM in India. And finally, as Mindy had mentioned, that the kind of difference that we see in the consumption and the savings of high energy users versus low energy users, it would be beneficial to prioritize registration of high energy consuming households first, to maximize the program's impact, and also to make it more cost effective for the DISCOM to roll out such initiatives in their jurisdiction. And finally, what are some of the policy and programmatic opportunities? This is not an exhaustive list, but we are very open to feedback. In fact, we would encourage the chat section and the Q&A section to also have suggestions on what are the ways in which HERs can be a part of existing policies and programs. And these are just 3 ways that we have come up with. First, of course, is the fact that HERs are driven by electricity consumption, and they are associated with electricity bill. Electric utilities can easily adopt something like this. They are very low cost interventions described in these HERs. So can it be possible for this to be mandated by the regulatory commissions as a part of the demand side management interventions? The second way in which we can tap into HERs is to roll out these kinds of programs in India's smart cities. So as some of you are familiar with the Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, can we look at adding additional indicators on behavior change programs, which could be used to track progress in different cities? And finally, we have actually tried this in Bangalore as well, and come up with some kind of a behavior-based tool to inform and guide the use of energy in common services, particularly in apartment complexes. So are there ways in which we can transform and inform the behavior of entire communities which are commonly using certain energy services within their boundaries? And given that this is a research paper and it's a working paper, a work in progress, there are various ways in which we find that further investigation can be done. These are three that we have identified in the paper as well. Firstly, how can the HERs be studied? So there are ways in which we can do it. It could be through RCTs or randomized control trials, which could test the impact of reports of different sections. We could also study the differential use by gender, because that's one of the key findings that we had, is that these HERs are read by men. And because some of our correspondents were also women, and it was quite interesting for us to see that there is still a gender dimension to who reads these and who adopts the recommendations which are provided there. The second aspect to this, which could be investigated, is how do we use all the insights generated for better policy making around residential energy use. So how do we study the relationship between household income and energy use over time? Can we collect micro data on appliance ownership to study the linkages between energy savings and investments in energy efficient appliances? So those are some of the ways in which further research can be done, and all researchers are welcome to try that as well based on the findings of this paper. And finally, given the huge push around smart metering, especially in several cities in India, does it make sense to use the smart metering data to investigate further on household energy uses, household energy consumption patterns? So these are just few of the research opportunities. I'm sure when you read the paper, you might come across different aspects which are more relatable and more suitable for your research. So we welcome that kind of collaboration as well. And I think this was all from our findings perspective, and we would like to get feedback from all of you on whether this kind of initiative makes sense and how we can continue to collaborate on research. So of this, as well as how do we scale up initiatives like we are. So yeah, and over to you, Ohana.
Thank you so much, Midi and Sumedha, for such a really insightful and interesting presentation. And we have shared the link of the report in the chat box, so you all can really download and go through the report, and feel free to mail us back, mail the authors back with your feedback. Now we're moving on to the next part of the event, which is the roundtable discussion. And I would like to invite all the panelists for the day to switch on your camera for the discussion. Our speakers for the day are Sumati Krishnan, who is the Executive Director of Technology Informatics Design Endeavour Tide, Aditya Chunekar, Fellow at Prayas Energy Group, Sabyasachi Patnaik, Director, Regulatory Affairs and Market Development, Oracle Utilities Global Business Unit, Dr. Manisha Jain, who is the Assistant Professor at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, and Dr. Shobhata Mukherjee, who is the Lead Behavioral Insights Unit of India, Niti Aayog, and Deputy Director at the Center for Social Behavioral Change at Ashoka University. I would also like to request my colleague, Sumedha, to moderate the discussion. So over to you. And once again, to all the panelists, participants, if you have any questions, please do keep adding it in the chat box and the Q&A box while our speakers, answer it parallelly.
Great. So I'm back again moderating this panel. I know pretty much everyone who's here, and so it's great to start this interesting discussion around our paper. I would actually like to give the floor to Sumati first. Given the work that Tide has been doing for several years on VR. Sumati, your reflections on the findings of the paper. What are some of your expectations? That were met by this paper? Were any of the findings surprising to you? I think that is something which we would definitely like to know.
Thanks, Sumedha. That's lovely to be here. And it's a sort of a culmination of our efforts in some sense, and I hope it goes much further than this. In some way, this program has been a very fond soul of Tide for quite some time, right from the conceptualization stage. And just to give you a background, Tide has always believed that any action should be based on evidence and data, and that is how this whole thing was conceptualized with some of our experience earlier in energy audits. where we found that other than actual interventions in terms of appliances, there is a significant housekeeping or a behavioral change. And that then was extrapolated to the household, and that is how we had conceptualized this program. The famous adage, which is very true, is what is not measured is not managed. I think we all believe in that if you really don't know what you're really consuming, there is no way you will take any steps to manage. In that sense, HARs of the VR were very, very useful insights, not only for us, but I hope for the users also. And coming to this study, I have to say that we do seem to have found quite a few needles in the haystack. Though difficult, I think we have managed to extract quite a few needles. It's very interesting. Some of them anecdotally, we just had a feed, but then this gave us the evidence. Some of them were surprising. I think we wanted to believe that social norm was playing a role, and it did not so much, whereas people were looking for the actual actionable recommendations. And even in the poll today, that was interesting to see. And other than that, I would say there were no big surprises really, but some things like how the readability of the report can really have such an influence on what they take away and how they act. Then the gender part is something that is really interesting, because TIDE has got this experience in rural areas. In our STOW program, we always found that a woman who's the person cooking is rarely the decision maker in deciding. And when you try to shift that paradigm, a whole lot of things happen. And it was very surprising that without some of the barriers in urban, like the education and where the women are working, and they have a say, still there is this thing. It may have to be validated, like Mindy and Sumedha said, but it's a very interesting dimension. That is something that was surprising. And other than that, I would say some of the demographic things geographically, like for example, for people who will get to read the paper, how Malleshwaram has got more saving in Bangalore than a Sarjapur. And if you know anybody in Bangalore, if you have a relative, a friend living in Bangalore who's in IT industry, they will invariably be in Sarjapur. And Malleshwaram is known to be a very conservative area, possibly with the older generation people. We really don't know, like it is written in the paper. So those are some interesting dimensions, surprising thing which came out, which data has backed it, possibly supporting the hypothesis that the lifestyle itself is altering some of these things. So I'll just stop here, and maybe we can take more questions as we go along. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Samiti. And I agree. I mean, the geographical differences, I think the folks living in Bangalore are most familiar with how people are so different, even within a city, small city, not a small city, but a big city like Bangalore. My next question is for Shoguto. And, you have a very interesting, role at NITI Aayog, leading the Behavioral Insights Unit. Can you, reflect on, the work that you're doing with the government, and tell us a bit about how behavioral insights like the ones which we have referenced in this paper can be socialized in India, particularly within the government? What are some of the opportunities? How does this, whole thing function at the government level?
Sure, happy to. First of all, congratulations on a fantastic research, Sumedha, Mindy, and the entire team. Very, very interesting stuff. And great to see this work being done in India. We've seen a lot of these OPAR type studies in the West, but great to see them being done in India. To a certain sense, I think that actually falls very well in also the question you asked. That in a lot of ways, that's kind of what we are trying to do at the Behavioral Insights Unit. Because for the longest time, behavioral science or behavioral insight work was restricted to what we call, quote unquote, the weird countries, and largely being done in the West. So it's great now that things are changing. Now we are warming up to this idea a lot in India, also at an institutional level. Setting up the Behavioral Insights Unit of India at NITI Aayog is, I think, is a very sort of positive step by the government to that direction. And we are also trying to sort of see that and move that forward. So there is definitely a lot of scope and a lot of work in the kind of behavioral insights that you have used, like social norms, reference points, actionable tips, and all. We do see some of that work actually happening. Of course, a lot of that work is happening in India. Researchers like you and others are doing it, but even within the government ecosystem, that work is happening. We don't get to hear about that a lot because, we don't generally get a chance to present that work or have wonderful platforms like this one to do that until at a very later stage when maybe a paper gets published or something like that. But there is a substantial amount of work that's happening within different parts of the government. I can tell you a little bit of some of these works that we have been involved with as the Behavioral Insights Unit of India. So I'll keep it short. I'll specifically tell you about maybe a couple of areas. So one which could be related to what also was discussed today. One is that we are the behavioral advisors to the National Jal Jeevan Mission, which is this big national mission of getting safe drinking water taps into every household of India who do not have access to that. Now, as one part of it, of course, is infrastructural, and there's obviously huge supply side to it, but it is as much behavioral in nature as it is infrastructural. And there is a formal recognition of that. So what we are trying to do is work mostly in rural areas, partnering with the government as well as with implementation partners on the ground like Tata Trust to focus on specific areas of behavior change. And two specific areas where we are focusing on. One is community participation. So how do you get communities to sort of increase uptake of this, but also how do you get them to maintain this system once the government can build it, but if it's not maintained, then it's of no use, right? So how do you maintain this system, and how can we make this sustainable, right, at a community level? And the second thing we are focusing on is very much similar to, in some sense, what you're doing, is looking at water conservation. So what we also don't want is because of this easy access, people should not be wasting water, right? Of course, water as a natural resource is also scarce in India. So we are trying to figure out, in some sense, how do we nudge people to sort of create like a water consumption level, which is an optimal level. And similar to what you have done, can we use social norms? Can we give them actionable tips? Sort of create some version of the HER for water, and see if that works. So we are planning to conduct RCTs to test them in small scale, and then based on the findings to scale them up. So that's like one concrete work that's happening at a big government level. The other big focus of the government right now is this idea of this campaign called LIFE, which stands for Lifestyle for the Environment, and this is a big priority for the Prime Minister's office. So there are two parts of this. One part of it is creating like an index, sort of energy use index. I believe WRI is also involved in that conversation. But the other part where we are focusing on more is to actually create nudges and use behavioral insights to create behavior change. And how can we sort of adopt sustainable climate behavior? It could be in terms of energy use, it could be in terms of water use, public transportation, sustainable travel, every aspect of that. So there, what we are trying to do is this campaign has been created, and we are trying to get sort of behavioral interventions from around the world, universities, research centers, and kind of test some of them, pilot some of the great intervention ideas that we get, and then the ones that work kind of scale up. And we are kind of focusing on the VIU is kind of focusing on that effort. I think the HER findings that you have could be could be a great candidate for that, right? I think that has serious potential there.
Sure, that's really interesting, Shrabrata. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, we do see a lot of opportunities to collaborate, particularly on the nudges that you just mentioned. I would now move to Dr. Jain, Dr. Manisha Jain. Dr. Jain, you heard us talk about the paper, and you have also had a chance to look at it as well. Your reflections on the findings and the research methods that you've used, and how does it relate to some of the research that you've done in the past? So if you could just talk a bit about, maybe take 2 minutes to sort of reflect on these findings.
Sure, Sumedha, thank you so much for calling me here. I have grown up listening and saying that energy efficiency is a low-hanging fruit, and you have shown how to grab that fruit. Literally showing a 7% decrease pre and post HER intervention, that's quite significant. Now, I would want to relate it to my work that I did in doctoral work and the work that I'm currently doing in terms of measuring energy efficiency. In doctoral work, I realized that in India, the major problem is with the information. Just as we saw, people weren't interested in whether their energy consumption was how it was as compared to their neighbors, what mattered to them, how can they bring it down. And if that mattered, it shows that somewhere there's a lack of information. Now, if the information is provided to them, then an action can be taken. So a lesson from there is what information will make a difference. Now, when we look at household energy consumption, there are two broad decisions that consumers make. One is purchase decisions, the other is utilization decisions. Utilization decisions bring short-term responses and lesser reduction in energy use as compared to the purchase decisions. So that is something that can be kept in mind when you are, you're giving recommendations focusing more on the purchase decisions. The other thing that I found in my doctoral research was that there is a heterogeneity in how consumers look at appliances. For us, it's just an appliance which is consuming electricity. We just look at the input to that appliance, but what consumers look at is the output of that appliance. So I'm interested in a cool room. I'm interested in refrigeration, lighting. I don't, I see only air conditioners and water heaters as high energy consuming products. That's where those are the appliances where I would want to make changes. I may not, I just can get a decently efficient product in other categories, and I'll be fine with that. So there is a heterogeneity there. The other thing we have to remember is there is heterogeneity in consumer choices also across population. So you can't expect all of them to respond to the report. So we have to know that we are addressing only a part of the problem. So lack of information is only part of the bigger problem of why people are not adopting energy efficient products. The other aspect which I'm trying to look at currently at IGIDR is how do we measure, how do we quantitatively measure the impact of energy efficiency interventions? We look at PAT scheme. PAT scheme, there was a mechanism by which all the savings were measured. And if I look at the aggregate energy consumption, I do the decomposition of that, I can find out that there has been a decline in the industrial energy intensity. And I can quantify that more than what B is saying, what they have saved on PAT scheme. Yes, they have saved more than that. But when I compare it with something that they say about, say, standards and labeling program, which is based on based on a simple engineering analysis, okay, these many CFLs have been sold, and so average usage will be this, average wattage rating will be this, and then this will be the saving. So those numbers actually do not reflect in the actual energy consumption data. So how we measure energy efficiency, savings from energy efficiency, if we look at that, has been one of the major drawback as to why energy efficiency has not got the push as compared to putting more capacity. I can measure how much capacity I'm putting, but I cannot measure how much capacity am I reducing by improving energy efficiency. So somewhere, because these reports are generating the energy savings data through measured energy savings. So these are not any estimates, these are measured energy savings. So this gives a very good reason to believe that yes, these interventions are working. Okay, so these are the two ways that I would like to connect it with what I have done in the past and what I am doing presently here.
Great. That's very helpful to know, Dr. Jain. Yes, and the heterogeneity that you just mentioned, I think that's also something precisely what we found even within the city of Bangalore. You know, the kind of ways people consume energy varies a lot. And now move on to Sabyasachi, who is with Oracle Utilities. And Sabyasachi, your work directly with BRPL was on rolling out home energy reports for a very large section of the population in Delhi. What do you think about the findings of this paper? Do you find anything which is similar to what you have found in your initiative in Delhi, and or there are some differences which you would like to flag?
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. Well, yes, this had been a few surprises, to be honest. Like, on the report which I talked about, first of all, is the below par, the usage going more. We also say saw this trend, but the difference was what you can say. So the pilot which we went through was for 200K. And it was a representative sample, kind of, as it was vouched and approved by the regulator of Delhi Commission. So what was like, what Bangalore and Delhi differed the way we did was we were seeing savings for the lower consumer category as well, and it all started like we started rolled out it was October of 2018, and we saw savings till June or July of 2019. And what actually created the difference would be the announcement, the electoral announcement of free electricity up to 200 units, and kind of and then everybody went on till kind of but yes, then it was an interesting point of view which utility also took of their own to address to those fence sitters, like as it has been told, like maybe those who are going just beyond 200, because the utility is going to raise the invoice to the State Department and they're going to get paid. So that is one thing which we tried doing that as well, not only to the low usage group, but all the fence sitters, which kind of in every level, as Mindy talked about, like every tariff level. So that is kind of we targeted. That is one thing which I wanted to highlight. The other is I would like to definitely know that and kind of when we went for our home energy report, so far home energy report, it was a very like then there was a audit or an you can say home energy analysis, which we say that was a pro bono, and there was a pretty good amount of participation in those within the 200K 2 lakh consumers. And what we found is like, and definitely like coming from the OPAR, we were providing those customized tips and to those who have gone ahead and submitted their home energy analysis, which talks about their appliances, because we don't want to force them to do that. The second was kind of and the thing is that we had both, like yes, this what I was wanted to know more about. Maybe I'll take it up later on, but yes, on the behavioral peer-to-peer comparison versus call to action, what I feel, I mean, this is definitely like OPAR's perspective, maybe vary from region to region. What I felt is the peer comparison is the, you can say, the problem statement, like that will trigger the call for action, which talks about like how the customize will go to action, and kind of these would be few trigger points. And our report had both, like I mean, how the person was different and kind of and how they were performing. And there had been by the utility also, there had been some sort of recognition, the one who had been doing extremely well. I mean, that analysis we gave to the utility and few forums, and that kind of really captured the and garnered the motions. So this is what few things which my observations, and yes. So the other, which last thing Sumita, is about the percentage of savings. Here we are talking about 7% or 6% of the high and medium user group. We kind of, we also had savings, but as I said, like, we had all three strata together, and post July of 2019, we saw a decline or no savings at all for the lower usage group. But I mean, like, in past, what we have been claiming, and that is what the results had been also, and maybe we'll be publishing it if the utility is agreed to, is that the whatever we claim, within our within OPAR, the savings had been in that range, maybe for developed economy up to 3%, but yes, we go up to 6% or maybe 10% for the smart meter analysis, for maybe have peak time rebate reduction program, or certain kind of program which has the smart meter analytics. So we get those number. But if we are roll out a mass scale, which definitely the difference here in this program and ours is the opt-in and opt-out. So I believe that is one kind of reason of the savings which we are talking about. Yeah, that's my take. That's
Great. And yeah, as we have been discussing, the cultural context vary a lot. So for you, finding the peer-to-peer comparisons was the problem statement. And here we find that the neighborhood comparisons are not something that people are really looking at. So within India also, the Delhi context, the Bangalore context, looks to be quite different. I would now ask Aditya. Aditya, you have also read the paper and also thankfully reviewed the paper. And there are certain things in the VR, in these findings that we have found that there is a correlation between the energy savings and the recommendation section. As a part of your work, you have been doing surveys to understand appliance purchasing behaviors. Any insights from that you would like to reflect on and connect with the findings that we have observed in the paper?
Thanks, Sumedha, and always good to be the last person talking. Of course, not if the first person takes all the time, which thankfully did not happen today. But congratulations on the report. And I agree, more such research needs to be done to both understand the human behavior behind energy use and how it can inform policy as well as program interventions. And I'll talk on 2 points, and they kind of relate to what Manisha and Sabyasachi talked about, and a little bit go into slightly deeper and related to the findings of the report. And if I get time, maybe a third minor point. So the first point is, like what you said, the single most important aspect was of the savings was when people use the recommendations to change their appliances or to drive their appliance purchase of efficient energy efficient appliances. And that is, in a way, it does make sense, because as Manisha mentioned, there are 2 ways in which people respond to any kind of recommendation. One is changing their behavior related to energy use, and second is changing their appliance. And in the first case, there might be the magnitude might also be smaller, and there might also some kind of fatigue that might set in after some time. But when you change the appliance, they are kind of permanent savings that will accrue over the period of the life of that product. And we also see that when we at Prayas, we did an initiative where we put actual monitors on 140 households, where we monitored their minute-wise consumption for about 1 or 2 years. And we did see when people change their ceiling fans with super efficient ceiling fans, or refrigerator with more efficient refrigerators, you see a significant consistent savings. And these are the appliances where those rebound effects are not that high, because you're not going to use refrigerator anymore because it's more efficient. So that's point number 1, which I found very interesting in the findings of this report. The second is what Sabyasachi alluded to, this whole the fact that the peer comparison may not be as important in Bangalore as compared to Delhi. And this is exactly where I agree with your recommendations, that more research which is focused on local context, gender. In fact, you observed variations within Bangalore, I mean, in different geographies. So that is a very important thing. And we did a study on AC behavior, how people purchase and use ACs in 5 different cities in India. And I don't want to propagate or confirm any stereotypes, but what we did find was when we asked the question whether the fact that your friends or your relatives own an AC, whether it impacts your own behavior. And what we found was of your behavior of buying an AC. And what we found was that 78% in Ghaziabad and 52% in Patna did say that this is a very important factor, whereas, and 40% in Nagpur. And then in Vadodara and Kochi, it was as small as 10 to 14%. So those kind of differences do exist. And that's exactly the reason why we need to do this kind of research more. And just one point related to the previous pointers, when we use these kind of reports to give recommendations for people to purchase appliances, we also need a further level of disaggregation of that data. As in, you need to tell that, well, your refrigerator is not efficient and you can get significant amount of savings by replacing an inefficient refrigerator. And there are some kind of smart algorithms, the disaggregation algorithms, you can use smart meter data to disaggregate the mainline consumption into consumption of different appliances. So that can be a next level of these kind of reports where you give those kind of very specific recommendations to people wherein they can replace their appliances. And just a minor point here that one should also take into account the existing life of the remaining life of those appliances, so that it should not happen that you have purchased a brand new refrigerator and in a year or two just replace it with an energy efficient appliance. So with that, just one minor point, which is in your report, the higher consumption is about 180 kilowatt hour per month, 180 units per month. That's still not that high, and I'm kind of impressed that you did find 7% savings. So imagine if there are the much more savings would be possible if it is higher than that, because for typically people having AC and using AC in Bangalore, maybe the users of AC would be less, but it can be 300, 400 units per month easily. And there's much more potential in saving. And therefore, those 54 rupees per month that can shoot up quite significantly, and that can lead to actual more energy savings. So with that, I'll stop, and maybe in the second round, we can discuss more.
Hey, thanks for that, Aditya. And yes, I do agree that, this kind of disaggregation, sort of taking those insights and taking that data to the next level is exactly what we actually tried in VR also, because our reports are customized and they are based on the current appliances that the user had reported to be using and the number of hours and who's actually been using them. But there's only so much you can do, within the resources that we have. And your suggestion on potentially in the future leveraging smart meter data for sort of disaggregating based on certain algorithms, I think that's the way to go to make it more resource efficient as well to track consumption. I know that we do have a few questions in the Q&A, and we also have another poll, which is like the final poll that we are running during this webinar. Ohana, can we have the last poll?
Just launching it, 30 seconds again.
Okay. Looks like we don't have anyone saying no. So it seems that anything which is offered for free, as we know in India, then people will be signing up and will be interested in joining. So yes, Sumati, note for ourselves that there is still going to be interest if it's for free.
Yeah, but I have something to pick the brains of people who said yes.
Yeah, we should definitely find.
Yeah.
But,
because the intent, one of the big learning is the intent does not always convert to action. That's right. What we had seen when we do awareness and mobilization. People are like, yes. And then when you go there with a form and you say, answer these questions, give this information, 9 out of 10 drop out. I mean, understandable reasons. But yeah, it's interesting to see. At least you're starting with that 100%. Then even if there is a dropout, you still hopefully catch a few people.
That's right. And one of the questions that has come pretty interesting and something which I think all of us who work in the energy sector can relate to and understand is with respect to how do we engage utilities. When it comes to rolling out HERs, the utilities are facing a loss of revenue due to open access, low demand growth, and there is an increasing pressure from different government levels on increasing the penetration of rooftop solar. So do the utilities really have an incentive to reduce consumption? And this is an open question for the panel, but I do think, Sabyasachi, with your experience, working also with the Delhi regulator in this whole process, if you would like to, take that, and others are also, welcome to respond. But for Sabyasachi.
Thank you. Yeah. Of course, it has been a challenging time, of course, these kind of programs are not the critical programs for any of the utilities. So it goes to the priority 3, priority 4, to push it, like for the you be working or for the regulator as well. The second is there is no as such targets or mandate by the regulator for the utilities or incentive to go for a run for these demand side management. And then there is a threat, as I can see the question about loss of revenue, which is the energy efficiency here, we need to understand that we are trying to optimize. We are not trying to reduce the consumption of the user as such. It is optimizing the consumption. Maybe peak time, or maybe where there is an unused of power, and maybe the utility also uses these kind of platform to have a marketplace, which is again going for a better efficient clients kind of thing. So these are few challenges is in terms of the priority, in terms of not having any targets or mandate for rolling out these programs. Yeah, these are, I feel, a few of the things as far as I personally, as from the utilities or the vendors for these kind of programs, solution provider.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And yes, this is till the time we think that till the time it becomes a regulatory mandate, utilities may not be interested in HERs, even though there is enough evidence to indicate that demand side management interventions do have an impact on the utilities, bottom line. So I think for us as researchers, there's a lot of work involved in that direction. I do see that there are other questions coming to the chat, and people are sort of also engaging in a debate on how utilities can be a part of this. But just have a final set of questions for our panelists here. And Sumati, as a grassroots organization, you've been working on changing behaviors of individuals and communities. What are some of your, asks and expectations when it comes to funding for testing or piloting these interventions? As we have agreed, they do require, certain number of resources. So what is your, expectation there?
Yeah. So I think this kind of behavioral change studies are in their nascent stage in India still. And there are also multiple stakeholders. On one side, you have the user and then the service providers. And I include both the utility and players like, your right from your electrician to your product manufacturers in that category. And then you have the regulatory authorities, and then you have civil society organizations, research organizations like WRI and other organizations, which are also now looking at a climate change perspective. So I think one of the challenge is to see who owns and who takes the action also. Largely till now, while the regulator has been saying do this, I think the push is coming from the civil society research and the climate action group. And I think one of the challenge will be to see how much we can make the users and the service providers take ownership on this issue. And when we say take ownership, it is also to do with how much they are willing to be part of that solutioning process. Like Oracle has experience and Tide and WRI have experienced, even though the utilities like the idea, there are things there which they need to commit to. Like, for example, the data or some action on that, or what do you do with that and stuff like that. So I think there is an opportunity for us all to together look at that spectrum. That is something that I would say. The other thing is that I think on the research side, there are a lot of open questions which are there, like the paper points out. One of the things that I wanted to mention, which possibly is there somewhere hidden, is the importance of hyper-local neighborhood. Somebody has also asked about the neighborhood there today. And Sakshi mentioned that, that social norm comparison is important. Maybe we'll have to go a little bit hyper-local. What we had found anecdotally is that within an apartment, there is an interest, not necessarily in the pin code, because in cities today, the pin codes have lost that kind of, the cohesiveness, where how do you bring the hyper locality in the neighborhood definition is something that we need to look at, and how do you build it into the social normative, the positioning of the benchmarking. So that's something. Other than this, I suspect at this point of time, this will be in the domain little bit on the research and grant mode, because I see a big problem here that the high-end users who have the most potential to reduce are not seen upon as people to whom we should subsidize anything. So the question comes that, this guy is already spending so much, why should I go and do this for him? And whereas for a low energy user, it's not seen as like, anyways, and aspirationally, he or she is increasing. What do we gain from this? Somewhere that anomaly we'll have to balance. And I think that is as a challenge. And here we'll have to look at not just the user as the target, but the environmental benefits. And also the messaging is different. That is our big learning for converting action, intent to action. The intention to save is different. The messaging is different. For some it is cost, for some it is environment, for some it is just a social reward. To say that, look, I put a solar in my house, I've reduced my energy, I am like the champion in my apartment, things like that. So this is something, and what Tide has off late understood after we started the program and we started going to schools to work with school children. School children are fantastic ambassadors. I think that is youth is something that we need to target on. We have seen children literally, forcing their parents to say, there are a lot of data issues, right? Parents think twice before giving their numbers, a lot of data questions, and children are like, nothing doing, I have to enroll for this program. So that is another response we are seeing. So we'll have to see how to leverage the stakeholders and take it ahead. So I'll just stop here, but I'm sure others will have much more to share from different perspectives. Thank you.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Sumati, there on this, at least for some time, being in this domain of research, and which is an interesting thing that you said, because, Shogoto, who works on this sort of research to action, kind of work at the Behavioral Insights Unit, we would like to, understand from you, what is your perspective on, taking this to the national and subnational level? Are there any additional support or tools that you think will be needed to help policymakers understand what we mean by behavioral insights? Is there a lot of skepticism around behavioral insights, because it's still a very new topic in India, and evidence, it takes a while to generate evidence, and we probably also don't have that much time. So what are our options?
Great question, and loving the discussion. But before going to that, just quickly commenting on Sumati's point, I think your intuition is spot on by using the children as sort of the agent of behavior change. So we did, couple of years ago, we did a waste management program, RCT in Maharashtra, targeting school children, and where we exactly found that children actually act as an agent of change. So if you change the behavior of the children, you can actually change the behavior in the family, right? So that intuition, I think, is quite spot on. Now coming to your question, Sumedha, this is an uphill task, and a task that I'm we are all kind of trying to go through and climb the mountain, but it's the peak seems quite far as we stand today. So I think one issue is typically, to give you a sense of why I'm saying that. So we recently analyzed 121 central government schemes, working with the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, and for a report that will come out soon. But what we found was quite shocking and surprising to us, which is that out of those 121 central government schemes, we found that only 17 of them mentions the word behavior change in them. Out of those 17, only 11 has a paragraph below the word behavior change, so there's any content to that. Out of those 11, only 6 has any IC materials to go with. Out of those 6, only 2 has allocated any budget to it. And out of that, only 1 has an M&E framework to actually measure the behavior change, which is Swachh Bharat. So that is the present state. So we have a long way to go in this. So we are trying to sort of analyzing, this was the first step, and we're trying to sort of address, like, how can schemes go up this pyramid? We have created like a behavior change pyramid, and how can sort of schemes go up to that? But in terms of scaling up, one of our main focus is actually to scale up successful behavior interventions. And what we are learning in the process is that it's very difficult to scale up a successful. So the thing that intrigued us and we were trying to solve was that there's so many good behavioral interventions out there. Why is it that so few of them actually get scaled up, right? So there's great idea, it works. Like so many researchers have shown that this is a great idea. Why doesn't it get picked up? Like, it seems like a no-brainer that this should be scaled up. So why don't it happen? Why doesn't it happen? So what we found is typically it's difficult to scale up interventions if scaling up comes as an afterthought, which typically happens. Like, as researchers, we focus on the idea, we want to show that it works, and once it works, then we say, okay, now we should scale up. That's kind of our mental model as researchers as well. So that typically makes it very difficult. So the question is not that really the government is not interested in scaling up, but it's just hard in some ways if it does not fall into the existing ecosystem. So it's very hard to plug in something, like plug in an intervention, whatever, how much great it is, into the existing ecosystem if it doesn't fall in this ecosystem. So no one wants to do additional work, even if it leads to great results, right? And it's very difficult to make change that way. So what we try to identify is, the way we try to approach is that we first do like a policy ecosystem mapping, figure out who are the stakeholders, right? If this intervention works, how do we ensure that this can get scaled up? And can it be scaled up? And in that process, we realized that some of great interventions are actually not scalable. It's just by the very nature of it, right? So for example, what we are now trying to do is we had these interventions we tested through our cities at the center of how to improve uptake of IFA pills for pregnant women to reduce anemia, which is a big problem in India. The NFHS 5 data shows that the problem has not reduced much. So we had tested 2 interventions that worked through our cities. And now when we try to scale up, we realized that one of them is not getting picked up. The reason being, and one of them is, and we found that the reason is that one is much more cost effective than other. Both had great effectiveness, but one is just not getting picked up because there isn't in the scheme, the districts don't have budget. It's not that they don't want to do it, but they just don't have budget. So they're looking at, okay, which one do I pick? And they're picking one over the other, right? So that intervention was great, but that was not scalable because the districts don't have budget to do it, right? So things like this. So what we are trying to do is we are now trying to bring in scalability up front. That mapping that, does schemes have budget for this? Is this fitting into a scheme that it can easily be scaled up? Is there IC budget for that? Is there other behavioral change budget for that? Is this in the mandate? Or how can we move it? So that's kind of what we're trying to do. And then think of a behavioral design that will fit into the ecosystem. If it gets work, then we can easily scale up. So that is the approach we are trying to take. But of course, I mean, this is it'll take us some time, and our objective is really to institutionalize behavioral science into the policy ecosystem, which is an uphill task. It'll take time, but we are confident that with enough researchers and enthusiasts and this big community that we have, we'll be able to do that.
Great, that's very helpful, Shrabata, and yes, it is a long journey ahead for all of us. We are almost at the end of time, but I know that just want to get very quick 30-second sound bites from Dr. Jain and Aditya on what, if you just have to pick, one idea or, one area of research related to behavior change in energy, which would that be? Only one, and you have, under 30 seconds to respond. First, Dr. Jain. You're on mute, Dr. Jain.
You've put me on a tight spot, okay? So I was actually looking forward to contributing to what's happening. So if you give me 30 seconds, maybe I can just add to, what's going on. So I don't want to wait more for more research, okay? So we can't keep saying, let's wait for more research. The other thing is, the idea of using electricity bills as a way to give that information. And why so? Because I found in my study that certification works very well with people. The label acts, the appliance label acts as a certification. So if the certification, in the electricity bill, there's something that's coming, it's gonna take up very well. And also somebody mentioned about the energy cost information, and I found that people don't know how much each of these appliances are consuming. So somewhere, if these recommendations have to do something with the with energy cost information, that would be, I think, will be extremely useful. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Great, that's helpful. Aditya?
Yeah, just one slightly different point is we need to, the thing is we need to have some policy traction for behavioral intervention. And for that, we need to make the case. And one way to make that case is also find ways to simulate the impact of these interventions and all the energy modeling that is happening. And one example is, for example, we have a detailed bottom-up residential energy consumption model. And what we found that just by increasing the trigger temperature, the temperature at which people switch on their ACs, air coolers, and and fans by 2 degrees Celsius, there's a potential of reducing the electricity consumption in 2030, the residential electricity consumption in 2030 by 25%. That's a significant potential. Now, I know this is just one way, and there can be multiple interpretations, and it also can be refined. But if we are able to, so this is the simulate the intervention of these different behavioral interventions, and then kind of project them, what is going to happen in 2030, that will definitely help make a case for policy action at different levels, right? From the central government, state government, utilities, everywhere. So with that, I'll stop.
And I think we are sort of heading in that direction, isn't it, Mindy? We are trying to do that as well. Great. This was a very interesting discussion, and I would like to thank all our panelists here. And I know that there is still a discussion happening in the Q&A, but we are at the end of time, and I would just hand it over to Amuna quickly for the closing.
Thank you so much, everybody. It was quite an interesting panel discussion, and lots of questions coming from the attendees as well. I would now like to request Bharat Jairaj, Director Energy Program, WRI India, to conclude the event with his closing remarks.
Thanks. Thank you, Avana. Thank you to all the panelists and speakers. As you heard, this study and what the efforts that TIDE and WRI did in Bangalore over these last couple of years with this particular study has shown a non-trivial consumption changes in electricity, and it underscores the sort of huge potential that behavior change could have in various things that India is trying to get done over these next decade or so. And we also heard from this really fascinating galaxy of experts of the various experiences and suggestions they have from the similar experience in the water sector, as well as the need to not just focus on the operational decisions, but to also think a little bit about the consumer purchase decisions. Now, of course, Sumati will remember that we consciously decided to focus on operational decisions when Vidyut Rakshaka was being designed, because we were concerned, and you keep hearing about how Indian consumers are so price sensitive and so on. So we didn't want to sort of alarm them by saying, here's how you can really save, and that if you want to really save, you have to actually spend so much more money. So we consciously decided to pick the no cost or low cost options as being the way we wanted to start. And that's why Manisha and Aditya, that's why we focused on the operational side and not really the purchase side. But your point is absolutely spot on. We do need to think about how we can take this also to the stage of purchase. Adding and acknowledging Aditya's other point of the need to then think of what level of information, what's that additional level of information we need to provide. We also actually, Sumati, you'll recall, we also talked about maintenance and assistance beyond that, because there's also this assumption that once you purchase an efficient appliance, that the savings will be forever, and that often people want further assistance about, are there people who are trained and can come and actually service those appliances and so on. So it's sort of, levels and levels that we can and should be proceeding towards. It was also, I think, extremely useful hearing OPower's own experience in this space and sort of driving home the point about local context and the need for us to understand our consumers and not design sort of one-size-fits-all schemes from somewhere and then sort of throw it around the country and say everyone apply this. So we need to get better at understanding the context, and something I think that Sugato, you also made this point. I think the bottom line is that these sorts of voluntary actions and efforts by groups like ours and by many of you, this will take us to a certain stage. But if we have to scale this, we're going to need many other key stakeholders to come on board. Aditya's sort of final 32nd point. And I think that is crucial. And I'm hoping that this paper, some of the other research that some of you are involved with, all of this actually helps us create that sort of community of like-minded organizations and individuals and researchers who actually then are able to collectively then build up enough interest amongst our other stakeholders, particularly state and national governments and utilities and so on, and actually take us forward. So on behalf of the organizers and actually as on behalf of the authors as well of the paper, I want to thank all of you for spending this afternoon with us, this 90 minutes with us. Thank you also for putting up with the delayed start and the sort of slightly delayed ending. And I hope this community of interested folks continues to find ways to explore this topic and work together. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.